Hello everyone, today we're going to read Mr. Twiddle. Mr. Twiddle and the Tickets. Mr. and Mrs. Twiddle were going away for a holiday. What fun! Now I'll do all the packing, said Mrs. Twiddle. If you do it, you'll take the most ridiculous things and leave out all the ones we shall really want. No, I shan't, said Twiddle, feeling hurt. Well, don't you remember last time you did the packing? Said Mrs. Twiddle. You packed the kitchen poker. Although it was summertime, you packed all your winter vests. I never did know why you packed the poker. Only because I thought it might come in useful, said Mr. Twiddle. You never know when or where you might meet a burglar. Well, I'll do the packing this time, said Mrs. Twiddle. And then we shall be certain of our toothbrushes and nightclothes and hankies and things like that. I'll ask Julia, my sister, if she'll have the cat whilst we're away. I'm glad we're not going to pack the cat anyway, said Twiddle, who thought their cat was a most interfering nuisance. He was always falling over her. And I'll shut up the house and tell the milkman to not leave any milk, went on Mrs. Twiddle. It seems to me as if you're going to do everything and leave me nothing to do at all, said Mr. Twiddle. Can't I do anything? Yes, you can go and buy the railway tickets, said Mrs. Twiddle. Mind you, put them somewhere safe so you don't lose them. So Twiddle went to buy the tickets. He put them into his pocket. Nice green tickets that would take him and Mrs. Twiddle to the seaside for a lovely holiday. Mr. Twiddle inquired about the trains. There's one at 10 o'clock and one at 11, said the porter. You had better been here 10 minutes before the train goes with your luggage. Then I can get you good corner seats. Right, said Twiddle. Thank you very much. He went home. I've got the tickets, wife, he said, and he showed her them. So we shan't have to get them on the day. That will save us a minute or two. Where are you going to put them? Asked Mrs. Twiddle. Don't put them into the teapot, please, where you once put my beads. I couldn't bear to drink ticket tea. Of course I shan't do a thing like that, said Twiddle crossly. I shall put them somewhere very safe indeed. Well, for goodness sake, tell me where you are going to put them, said Mrs. Twiddle, because you are sure to forget, and I shall have to remind you. Twiddle looked around the kitchen. Should he put them into the picture frame? No, he thought. Mrs. Twiddle might go dusting there and flick them out. He looked round again. Should he put them inside the clock? He wound the clock up every night, and he could see them there each time, and be reminded where they were. No, that won't do either. Mrs. Twiddle is always talking of sending that clock to be mended. It would be awful if she did send it, and the tickets too. Dear me, where can I put them? He thought he would put them into his hatband. They would be very safe there because his hatband was very tight and he would see them every time he went out. He wanted to put them there, but he changed his mind. No, it might rain when I was out. Then the tickets would get wet and soft. He thought, oh dear, where can I put these silly railway tickets? I wish I hadn't gone and got them. Well, in the end, Twiddle decided that the safest place of all would be in his waistcoat pocket. Then he would be bound to take them to the station with him, because he would be wearing his waistcoat anyhow. Have you found a place for the tickets, Twiddle? Asked Mrs. Twiddle at last. Twiddle nodded. Yes, he said, a very sensible place too, in my waistcoat pocket. Good, said Mrs. Twiddle. You simply can't help taking them with you if you put them there. Mrs. Twiddle soon started packing and finished it. She got Twiddle to sit on the trunk while she strapped it up. She went to her sister Julia with the cat, but when she got home again, the cat was there before her. It didn't like Julia. It's a very silly cat, the way it behaves, said Twiddle in disgust. It's not a bit of good you taking it to Julia. It will keep on coming back. Can't it catch mice and rats for itself? It always seems to me to look after itself very well. But Mrs. Twiddle didn't like the idea of leaving the cat without anyone to see it. So once more she took it round to Julia, and this time it was locked into the scullery, where it was not be able to get home before Mrs. Twiddle did. The great morning came. Mr. and Mrs. Twiddle had an early breakfast, shut up the house, and got into the taxicab that called for them. On the way to the station, Mrs. Twiddle asked Twiddle to get the tickets ready. He felt round for them. But what was this? He hadn't got his waistcoat on. He was wearing his pullover instead. Mrs. Twiddle stared at Twiddle in dismay. You stupid man! You decide to wear your pullover instead of your waistcoat. And now you must have gone and left the tickets behind. Quick, tell the taxi man to go back. Twiddle rapped on the window and told the man to turn and go back. He felt very cross with himself. They got to the house and Twiddle jumped out. He unlocked the front door and ran in. He ran up the stairs and went to the wardrobe. His waistcoat was there. Twiddle ran his fingers into the pocket and gave a loud groan. There were no tickets there. My, said Twiddle. What have I done with them? But where did I put them? He felt in all his pockets and he looked in his hatband. He looked in his shoes. No tickets. He heard Mrs. Twiddle calling out to him, Twiddle! Twiddle! What in the world are you doing? Do you want to miss the train? For goodness sake, come along! Coming! Yelled Mr. Twiddle and hurriedly looked around in all the bedroom drawers for the tickets. He looked in the drawers. No tickets. He looked on the washing stand. No tickets. He looked under the bed. Certainly no tickets. Twiddle! It's 10 to 10. You must come, called Mrs. Twiddle. The taxi man hooted his horn so loudly that all the neighbors looked out of their windows in surprise. Just coming, yelled poor Twiddle and went down the stairs 3 steps at a time. He ran into the kitchen. He must have put the tickets there. He looked inside the clock. No tickets. He even looked into the picture frame. No tickets. He looked into the teapot, the milk jug and the sugar basin. But there were no tickets to be seen anywhere. Mrs. Twiddle got out of the cab and came hastily into the house. Twiddle, what are you doing? Why don't you come? We shall certainly miss the train. I can't find the tickets, said poor Twiddle, his face as red as a beetroot. Toot, 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 went the taxi man's horn. Mrs. Twiddle made a clacking noise that Twiddle hated because it always meant that she felt very cross. I might have guessed it, she said. The one thing I asked you to do. Was there ever a sillier man than you? Well, you have probably put them down in the sink, or in the dustbin, or even in the rubbish heap, so it's no good looking for them. Come along, we shall have to buy some more. Twiddle slammed the front door. He went out to the taxi cab, and he went and saw something lying on the garden wall. It was the cat. Look at that, he said to Mrs. Twiddle. There's the cat back again. I hope you won't take her to Julie again. Oh dear, said Mrs. Twiddle in dismay. Now we haven't time. She must go with us. I'm sure she would sit quietly on your knee all the time. What? Take the cat with us? On my knee? Cried Twiddle, horrified. You know it doesn't like me. Why, part of the niceness of having a holiday was leaving the cat behind. It's always interfering with me. Well, Puss will have to come, said Mrs. Twiddle firmly. Hold your tongue, Twiddle. What with losing the tickets and losing the train, you've done enough for one morning. The train could be heard whistling in the distance. It had come into the station and now was whistling its way out. How tiresome. Now they had missed it. Train's gone, Mum, said the taxi driver. I know, said Mrs. Twiddle. Twiddle, take the cat, please. I've got the lunch basket to carry. I'll carry the basket, said Twiddle. You carry the cat. No, you'd lose the lunch things, said Mrs. Twiddle. Here's the cat. You can't lose her. She'll be frightened and stick close to you. They arrived at the station. I must go and buy some new tickets, said Mrs. Twiddle. Now hold on to the cat and just stand here, so that I know where you are. Mrs. Twiddle went to the ticket office. She opened her bag to get out her money, and there, neatly tucked among the coins, were 2 green railway tickets. Mrs. Twiddle stared at them. The tickets? They're in my bag? How in the world did they get here? She turned back to Twiddle, who was trying to stop the cat from putting her claws into his shoulder. Twiddle, look here! How did these tickets get into his bag? Twiddle stared, and then he grinned in delight. Of course, that is where I put them when I changed my waistcoat for a pullover. I remember thinking that the very safest place of all would be your bag, because you are never parted from that, and you would sure take it to the station with you. Wasn't I clever, wife? It would be cleverer if to remember where you had put them, said Mrs. Twiddle. We'll now have missed the train, but never mind. The porter says there is another one at 11 o'clock. It's faster than the one we missed and won't be so crowded. And anyway, it was a good thing we had to go back because we found poor old Puss and she'll be able to have a holiday with us. Oh my, groaned Twiddle to himself. Why didn't I remember I'd popped the tickets into Mrs. Twiddle's bag? Then we won't have gone back and found the cat. Now she'll spoil my holiday. I know she will. In future, I'll be sensible and remember every single thing. But he won't, will he? Poor old Twiddle. He had the cat on his knee all the way to the seaside, and dear me, how did she dig her 20 claws into him? Thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.